The diplomatic shuttle Harmony drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, its sleek white hull reflecting the distant stars like a mirror. Inside the cramped passenger compartment, Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she reviewed the mission, briefing on her tablet one final time. The Cathari Confederation had requested a human mediator for their border dispute with the militant Vorthon Empire. It was a delicate situation that had been brewing for decades, with both sides amassing fleets along their shared frontier. The galactic community feared an all-out war that could drag dozens of species into the conflict. Elena had been chosen specifically for her reputation. In her 15 years as a diplomatic representative, she had never failed to broker peace between warring factions. Her colleagues often joked that she could convince a supernova to burn more quietly if she asked nicely enough. The aliens who had worked with her described her as impossibly gentle, patient beyond measure, and utterly committed to finding peaceful solutions. Captain Morris Chen, the shuttle pilot, glanced back at her through the cockpit doorway. "We're approaching the Cathari diplomatic station, Ambassador. They're requesting permission to board and escort you personally." Elena nodded with a soft smile. "Of course, Captain. Please extend our gratitude for their courtesy." The Cathari were a fascinating species, standing nearly 3 meters tall. They resembled giant praying mantises with crystalline exoskeletons that shifted color based on their emotional state. Their society valued honor above all else, and their warriors were legendary throughout the galaxy for their skill in single combat. Yet they had specifically requested human mediation, which puzzled many observers. As the shuttle docked with the massive station, Elena gathered her simple belongings. She traveled light, carrying only basic clothing, her diplomatic credentials, and a small leather journal that never left her side. The journal was worn and weathered, its pages filled with handwritten notes from countless negotiations. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss, revealing 3 Cathari officials. Their leader, Ambassador Thekmar, stood at attention with his exoskeleton displaying the deep blue of formal respect. His mandibles clicked in what Elena recognized as a greeting. "Ambassador Vasquez," Thekmar said in heavily accented standard. "We are honored by your presence. Your reputation for bringing peace precedes you across the stars." Elena bowed slightly, a gesture of respect she had learned during her first diplomatic mission with the Cathari decades ago. "The honor is mine, Ambassador Thekmar. I hope we can find a path forward that serves both our peoples." As they walked through the station's corridors, Elena observed the subtle signs of a civilization preparing for war. The hallways buzzed with activity as military officers moved with urgent purpose. The walls displayed tactical screens showing fleet positions and supply routes. Despite the Cathari's request for mediation, they were clearly not taking any chances. Thekmar led her to a spacious guest quarters overlooking the station's central hub. Through the massive viewport, Elena could see Cathari warships arranged in precise formations, their hulls gleaming like deadly jewels against the starfield. "The situation has deteriorated since we first contacted your government," Thekmar explained, his exoskeleton shifting to amber tones that indicated anxiety. "The Vorthons have moved 3 battle groups to the disputed systems. Our military council believes they intend to strike within days." Elena set down her small bag and turned to face him fully. "What changed?" "Your initial communication suggested both sides were willing to negotiate. The Vorthons agreed to talks, yes, but they insist on conducting them from a position of strength. They demand we withdraw our forces first, leaving our colonies defenseless." Thekmar's mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation. "It is unacceptable. And yet you called for a human mediator rather than escalating militarily," Elena observed gently. "That tells me you still believe peace is possible." Thekmar's exoskeleton flickered through several colors before settling on a pale green that Elena didn't immediately recognize. "There are stories about human mediators, about their unique ability to find solutions where none seem to exist. We have heard that humans possess a rare gift for understanding the true nature of conflict." Elena smiled softly. "We simply try to see situations from all perspectives. Sometimes the answer isn't about who's right or wrong, but about finding what both sides truly need." Over the next several hours, Elena immersed herself in the details of the dispute. The Cathari provided her with historical records, territorial maps, and detailed analyses of resource distribution in the contested systems. She read everything with careful attention, making notes in her leather journal as she worked. The core issue seemed straightforward enough. 3 star systems sat along the border between Cathari and Vorthan space. Both sides had established colonies there during their expansion periods, and both claimed historical rights to the territories. The systems contained valuable mining resources and strategic jump points that would be crucial in any future conflict. But Elena had learned long ago that the obvious issues were rarely the real ones. She needed to understand what drove both sides beyond simple territorial ambition. The Cathari valued honor and would not be seen as backing down from a challenge. The Vorthans were an aggressive species that respected only strength and would interpret any compromise as weakness. As she worked late into the station's artificial night cycle, Elena felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Thousands of lives hung in the balance, perhaps millions if the conflict spiraled beyond the border regions. She had faced such pressure many times before, but it never became easier to bear. Her tablet chimed softly with an incoming message. Captain Chen was informing her that the Vorthan delegation would arrive the following day aboard their flagship Conquest. The name alone told Elena much about their mindset. She closed her journal and moved to the viewport, watching the Cathari fleet maintain its vigilant patrol patterns. Somewhere out there in the darkness, Vorthan warships waited with equal determination. Tomorrow she would meet with both sides and begin the delicate work of finding common ground between two civilizations that seemed determined to fight. Elena had built her career on the belief that every conflict could be resolved through patience, understanding, and careful negotiation. She had never encountered a situation that couldn't be solved with the right combination of words and compromise. But looking out at the assembled war fleets, she wondered if this time might be different. She opened her journal one more time and wrote a single line. Sometimes the greatest act of peace is knowing when to prepare for war. The words surprised her as she wrote them, but they felt true in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. The Vorthan flagship Conquest arrived with all the subtlety of a meteor strike. Elena watched from the observation deck as the massive dreadnought emerged from hyperspace in a brilliant flash of energy. The ship was a testament to Vorthan engineering philosophy. Brutal efficiency wrapped in intimidating armor plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Ambassador Thekmar stood beside her, his exoskeleton cycling through agitated orange patterns. They could have approached on a diplomatic courier, he muttered. Instead, they bring a ship capable of glassing a planet. Elena studied the Vorthan vessel through the reinforced transparency. They're making a statement. The question is whether it's meant for us or for their own people back home. The Vorthans docked with considerably less ceremony than the Cathari had shown. No honor guards, no formal greetings, just the harsh clang of magnetic clamps securing the two vessels together. Elena straightened her simple gray suit and checked her appearance one final time. First impressions would be crucial with a species that valued strength above diplomacy. General Krextor emerged from the airlock like a walking nightmare. The Vorthans were reptilian humanoids, but evolution had shaped them into something that seemed designed purely for warfare. Standing 2.5 meters tall, Krextor's hide was covered in natural armor plates that had been enhanced with cybernetic implants. His eyes glowed with a cold amber light, and when he spoke, his voice carried the rumble of controlled violence. So, he said in perfect standard, his gaze fixing on Elena with predatory intensity, the humans send us a librarian to discuss matters of war and territory. Elena met his stare without flinching. She had faced down warlords, dictators, and conquerors across a dozen worlds. The key was never to show fear, but also never to issue a challenge. General Krextor, I'm Ambassador Elena Vasquez. Thank you for agreeing to these talks. The Vorthan's laugh was like grinding metal. I agreed to nothing. My government ordered me to listen to whatever peace babble you wish to spout, before we take what is rightfully ours. He gestured dismissively at Thekmar. The insects can surrender their illegal colonies now, or we will remove them by force. Thekmar's exoskeleton flashed bright red, the Cathari equivalent of drawing a weapon. Illegal? Our people have farmed those worlds for 3 generations. After stealing them from systems we had already claimed, Krextor snarled. Your expansion violated the Nexus Accords of 2387. Elena stepped smoothly between them, before the situation could escalate further. Gentlemen, we're here to find solutions, not rehearse old grievances. Perhaps we could move to the conference room and examine the situation more carefully. The next 6 hours were among the most frustrating of Elena's career. Every attempt at finding common ground was met with rigid positions from both sides. The Vorthons demanded complete withdrawal of Cathari forces and civilians from all 3 disputed systems. The Cathari insisted on maintaining their colonies while offering to share mining rights in the outer system. General Krextor dismissed every compromise, Elena suggested with barely concealed contempt. Your reputation is clearly exaggerated, Ambassador. Perhaps humans are simply too weak to understand that some conflicts can only be resolved through strength. Elena kept her expression neutral, but her fingers tightened slightly around her pen. General, I've mediated territorial disputes across 17 different systems. In every case, both sides ultimately benefited more from negotiated settlement than they would have from warfare. Because you dealt with civilized species, Krextor replied. The Vorthons take what we need. It is our nature, and it has served us well for millennia. As the formal session ended with no progress, Elena retreated to her quarters to review her options. The situation was worse than she had initially assessed. The Vorthons weren't interested in compromise. They saw the talks as a formality before launching their attack. The Cathari were too proud to back down from what they perceived as naked aggression. Her tablet chimed with an encrypted message from Earth. The human government was growing, concerned about the implications of a Vorthon-Cathari war. Both species had extensive trade relationships throughout the galaxy, and a major conflict could disrupt shipping lanes that human colonies depended on. But there was something else in the message that caught Elena's attention. Intelligence reports suggested the Vorthons were planning something beyond a simple territorial grab. Reconnaissance drones had detected unusual military buildups in several sectors, far more than would be needed for a border conflict. Elena opened her leather journal and began writing. Not the careful diplomatic notes she usually kept, but something else entirely. She found herself sketching tactical diagrams, analyzing fleet compositions, and calculating supply line vulnerabilities. The skills came flooding back as if she had used them yesterday instead of 2 decades ago. Before becoming a diplomat, Elena Vasquez had been Colonel Elena Vasquez, one of the youngest officers ever to command a human battle group. She had fought in the Centauri Rebellion, the Proxima Independence War, and the brutal campaign against the Harvest Fleet. Her tactical brilliance had earned her commendations from every human military branch and grudging respect from alien observers, but after the Harvest Fleet campaign, something had changed. The cost of victory had been too high, the choices too difficult. She had resigned her commission and dedicated herself to preventing the wars she had once been so skilled at fighting. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. Ambassador Thekmar was requesting an urgent meeting. Elena closed her journal and made her way to his quarters, where she found the Cathari leader in a state of barely controlled agitation. Our long-range sensors have detected Vorthon fleet movements, Thekmar said without preamble. They're not just positioning for an attack on the disputed systems. They're massing forces for a full-scale invasion of our core territories. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. How certain are you of this intelligence? Our sensor networks are among the most advanced in the galaxy. The Vorthons have assembled at least 12 battle groups across 4 staging areas. This isn't a border skirmish, it's preparation for a war of conquest. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. If the Vorthons were planning a major offensive, these negotiations had been a sham from the beginning. They were simply buying time to complete their military preparations while keeping the Cathari focused on the wrong threat. General Krextor knows we're aware of his true intentions, Elena realized. That's why he's been so dismissive. He doesn't expect these talks to succeed because success was never the goal. Thekmar's exoskeleton shifted to deep purple, indicating profound concern. Ambassador, we need your help now more than ever. If the Vorthons attack in force, thousands of our colonies could fall before our main fleets can respond. Elena stared out the viewport at the Vorthon flagship, its dark hull seeming to pulse with contained menace. Everything she had worked for over the past 2 decades, every life saved through careful negotiation, every war prevented through patient diplomacy, hung in the balance. She thought about the message from Earth, about the human colonies that would suffer if this conflict spread. She thought about the Cathari civilians on those disputed worlds, unaware that they had become pawns in a much larger game. Most of all, She thought about the leather journal in her quarters, filled with tactical assessments she had hoped never to use again. "Ambassador Theckamar," she said quietly, "I need to send some messages to Earth. Encrypted channels. Highest priority. Of course, but what can your government do? Even if they send a fleet, it would take weeks to arrive." Elena's smile was sad but determined. "My government won't be sending a fleet, Ambassador. But they might send something more valuable than ships." She paused at the door, looking back at her alien colleague. "Tell your military commanders to prepare detailed assessments of Vorthon fleet dispositions. Every ship, every base, every supply depot. I have a feeling we're going to need that information very soon." Elena's fingers flew across the secure communication terminal in her quarters, encoding messages that she had hoped never to send again. Each transmission carried its own weight of history, reaching out to contacts she hadn't spoken with in 20 years. Former colleagues scattered across the galaxy, now holding positions of influence in governments, militaries, and intelligence organizations. The first message went to Admiral Sarah Chen on Luna Station, her former tactical officer and oldest friend in the service. The second reached Colonel James Reeves, now head of human intelligence operations in the outer colonies. The third went to a man known only as Phoenix in the underground networks that connected human special operations across dozens of worlds. She wasn't calling for ships or soldiers. She was calling for something far more dangerous: information and expertise. As she worked, Elena's mind shifted into patterns of thought she had buried for 2 decades. The peaceful diplomat who had spent years mediating conflicts began to fade, replaced by the strategic mind that had once orchestrated some of humanity's most decisive military victories. She analyzed Vorthon fleet deployments with the same care she had once used to craft peace treaties, looking for weaknesses and opportunities. The Vorthons had made a critical error in their planning. They assumed that their military buildup would remain secret until they were ready to strike. But they had underestimated both Cathari sensor capabilities and human intelligence networks. Elena began to see possibilities that General Krextor had never considered. A soft knock interrupted her work. Captain Chen entered, his expression troubled. "Ambassador, I'm receiving some unusual traffic on the emergency channels. Several human vessels have requested permission to dock at the station." Elena looked up from her terminal. "What kind of vessels, Captain?" "That's the strange part. They're all registered as civilian craft, cargo haulers, passenger liners, even a few tourist ships. But their transponder codes are triggering some interesting alerts in my navigation system." Elena smiled for the first time in days. "Clear them for docking, Captain. And don't be surprised if their cargo manifests don't quite match what they're actually carrying." Over the next 12 hours, 6 human vessels docked with the Cathari station. To casual observers, they looked like ordinary civilian traffic. But Elena recognized the signs, the careful spacing of their arrivals, the specific docking bays they requested, the way their crews moved with military precision despite wearing civilian clothing. Her messages had been received and understood. The first to seek her out was Admiral Chen, officially traveling as a military advisor aboard a diplomatic courier. In reality, she commanded the largest human battle fleet in the sector, currently holding position 3 light years away. Sarah Chen had grown older, her black hair now streaked with silver, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence Elena remembered. "Elena," Sarah said as they embraced in private, "I got your message. 20 years of retirement and you're asking me to dust off the Proxima playbook?" "The situation is worse than you know," Elena replied. "Show me what you've brought." Sarah's smile was grim. 2 battle groups, including the new Excalibur-class carriers. But more importantly, I brought Marcus. Elena felt her heart skip. Marcus Webb had been the finest intelligence analyst in human space, capable of predicting enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. If Sarah had managed to bring him out of retirement, the situation had just become far more manageable. The second arrival was Colonel Reeves, traveling as an agricultural inspector. His cargo hold supposedly contained grain samples for alien colonies, but Elena knew it actually held the most advanced surveillance equipment human technology could produce. "The Vorthons don't know we're here yet," Reeves reported, "but that won't last long. How do you want to play this?" Elena led him to a secure conference room, where Ambassador Theckamar waited with several Cathari military leaders. The aliens observed the new arrivals with obvious curiosity, their exoskeletons displaying patterns of cautious hope. Gentlemen, Elena began, I need to share something about human diplomatic doctrine that most species don't understand. When we send ambassadors to prevent wars, we don't just send negotiators. We send people who understand war so thoroughly that they can see ways to prevent it. She activated the room's holographic display, showing the tactical assessments she had been working on. General Krextor believes he's dealing with a soft human diplomat who will plead for peace while he prepares his attack. He's about to discover that humanity's approach to preventing war is somewhat more proactive. The display showed Vorthan fleet positions across 4 sectors, compiled from intelligence reports and Cathari sensor data. Elena began pointing out vulnerabilities in their deployment, supply line weaknesses, and communication bottlenecks that could be exploited. The Vorthans have assembled an impressive force, she continued, but they've made several critical errors. They've concentrated their command vessels in positions that assume they'll be fighting a conventional defensive war. They haven't prepared for the possibility that their enemy might strike first. Thekmar's mandibles clicked in what Elena recognized as confusion. Ambassador, are you suggesting that we launch a preemptive attack? That would violate every principle of defensive warfare. Not we, Elena corrected.
Me. Technically, I'm no longer acting as a diplomatic representative.
I'm now serving as a military consultant to the Cathari Confederation, advising on defensive strategies against an imminent invasion. Sarah Chen leaned forward. Elena, if you're planning what I think you're planning, you'll need more than just intelligence and tactics. The Vorthans have 3 times our combined firepower, which is why we're not going to fight them conventionally, Elena replied. We're going to do what humans do best. We're going to cheat. She changed the display to show communication relay stations and supply depot locations throughout Vorthan space. The Vorthans rely on centralized command structures and lengthy supply lines. If those systems were to suffer simultaneous failures at precisely the right moment, their entire invasion force would be left blind and stranded. Colonel Reeves smiled slowly. And I suppose you have some ideas about how such failures might occur? Several ideas, actually, but they would require coordinated action across multiple systems, perfect timing, and the kind of intelligence network that officially doesn't exist. Elena looked around the room at the assembled officers and officials. I want to be very clear about what I'm proposing. This isn't diplomacy anymore. This is warfare, conducted by methods that most civilizations would consider highly irregular. If we do this, there's no going back to peaceful negotiations. Thekamar's exoskeleton cycled through several colors before settling on determined silver. Ambassador, or should I say Colonel, if the Vorthans intend to invade our core worlds, then our choice has already been made for us. What do you need from us? Elena's smile was sharp and predatory, an expression that would have shocked the diplomats who thought they knew her. Complete access to your intelligence networks, communication with your fleet commanders, and 12 hours to coordinate with assets you're better off not knowing about. She paused, looking each person in the room in the eye. And I need everyone to understand that after tomorrow, the galaxy is going to see a very different side of human diplomatic philosophy. Sarah Chen chuckled. Just like old times, Elena, when do we start? We already have, Elena replied, activating her secure terminal. Colonel Reeves, I need you to establish communication with Phoenix Network assets in all 4 target sectors. Admiral Chen, position your battle groups for rapid response, but keep them hidden until I give the signal. She turned to Thekmar. Ambassador, it's time to show General Krextor that his assessment of human capabilities may have been somewhat incomplete. At precisely 0400 station time, Elena's plan began to unfold across 4 star systems simultaneously. To outside observers, it would appear as if the Vorthans had suffered an extraordinary series of technical failures and unfortunate accidents. The reality was far more calculated. In the Rigel sector, a routine maintenance error at the primary communication relay station resulted in a complete network shutdown that would take hours to repair. The maintenance crew responsible had arrived that morning with perfect credentials and flawless documentation. They would disappear just as thoroughly as they had appeared. In the Deneb system, a convoy of supply ships suffered simultaneous engine failures that left them stranded in deep space. The failures were caused by microscopic devices that had been planted weeks earlier by cargo inspectors, who had vanished into the vast network of civilian shipping traffic. In the Vega sector, the main command base experienced a cascading computer virus that wiped out communication protocols and tactical databases. The virus had been delivered by a seemingly innocent software update that had passed through 17 different security checks. Elena watched the reports flow in from her command center aboard the Kethari station, her expression calm despite the magnitude of what she had orchestrated. Beside her, Admiral Chen monitored fleet movements while Colonel Reeves tracked the success of each operation through encrypted channels. Phoenix Network confirms all primary targets have been neutralized, Reeves reported. The Vorthons are completely cut off from their command structure. Elena nodded, then activated the communication system. General Krextor, this is Ambassador Vasquez. I believe we need to resume our negotiations immediately. The response took several minutes to arrive, and when it did, the Vorthon's voice carried a note of barely controlled fury. What have you done, human? Our communication networks are experiencing technical difficulties across multiple sectors. How unfortunate, Elena replied with perfect diplomatic politeness. I hope your technical staff can resolve these issues quickly. In the meantime, perhaps we could discuss a more reasonable approach to the disputed territories. Do not test me, Ambassador. Technical failures will not save your insect friends from the inevitable. Elena's voice remained pleasantly neutral. General, I think you misunderstand the situation. These aren't just technical failures. They're a demonstration. She activated the holographic display in the negotiation room, showing real-time positions of Vorthon forces across all 4 sectors. Red indicators marked every unit that had been affected by the coordinated strikes. Your invasion fleet has been reduced to individual battle groups with no communication, no resupply and no coordination, Elena continued. They're scattered across dozens of systems, each one operating blind. Meanwhile, Kethari forces have been reinforced by human assets that you never knew existed. The silence from General Krextor stretched for long minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier confidence. You planned this. The entire negotiation was a trap. No, General. The negotiation was genuine. I truly hoped we could find a peaceful solution. Elena's tone grew colder, but when it became clear that you were using the talks to buy time for your invasion preparations, I decided to use that same time for preparations of my own. Ambassador Thekmar entered the room, his exoskeleton displaying patterns of grim satisfaction. General Krextor, our scouts report that your fleet elements are attempting to regroup, but without central coordination, they're easy targets for our patrol squadrons. Elena leaned forward slightly. Here's your new situation, General. Your invasion force is effectively neutralized. Your supply lines are broken. Your command structure is blind. And you're sitting in the middle of a Kethari military installation with a single ship. She paused to let that sink in. However, I'm still willing to negotiate. The original disputed territories could be placed under joint administration. Mining rights could be shared. Your forces could withdraw with honor rather than face destruction piecemeal. And if I refuse? Krextor's voice was tight with suppressed rage. Elena's smile was visible in her voice. Then you'll discover what happens when humans stop trying to prevent wars and start fighting them instead. As if summoned by her words, the station's sensors detected new arrivals. Admiral Chen's battle fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their human vessels bristling with weapons that represented the latest in military technology. The contrast with the disabled Vorthon forces was stark and unmistakable. Admiral Chen, Elena said formally, please transmit our fleet composition to General Krextor. The data stream that followed would have made any military commander reconsider their position. 2 full battle groups of the most advanced ships in human space, including experimental weapon systems that had never been publicly acknowledged. Stealth frigates that could appear on sensors one moment and vanish the next. Carrier vessels equipped with fighter squadrons that moved like deadly swarms. But the most impressive element wasn't the ships themselves. It was the precision of their deployment. Every vessel was positioned to maximum tactical advantage, creating overlapping fields of fire that could destroy the Vorthon flagship in seconds, while simultaneously protecting the station and its inhabitants. This is impossible, Krextor muttered, probably not intending for his words to be transmitted. Human intelligence said your fleets were scattered across dozens of systems. Human intelligence was correct, Elena replied. What your spies didn't realize is that when humans really need to move quickly, we have methods that most species consider unconventional. She wasn't lying. Admiral Chen's fleet had used a combination of experimental jump drives and pre-positioned supply caches, to cover distances that should have taken weeks in a matter of hours. The technology was so classified that most human governments didn't know it existed. Colonel Reeves looked up from his intelligence console. Elena, we're receiving surrender offers from isolated Vorthan units across all 4 sectors. Without coordination, their local commanders are making independent decisions to avoid destruction. Elena nodded, then addressed the Vorthan general directly. General Krextor, your invasion force is collapsing. Individual commanders are already seeking terms rather than face hopeless battles. You can either accept reasonable negotiations now, or you can watch your entire military reputation be destroyed along with your ships. The silence stretched even longer this time. Elena could imagine the furious calculations taking place aboard the Conquest. Krextor was a military commander first and a diplomat second. He understood the mathematics of warfare better than anyone. What are your terms? He finally asked. Elena felt a moment of genuine sadness. Despite everything, she had hoped it wouldn't come to this. But sometimes the only way to prevent a greater war was to demonstrate the cost of pursuing it. Complete withdrawal of Vorthan forces from the disputed systems, she began. Establishment of a joint commission to oversee territorial boundaries. Reparations for damages caused by your military buildup, and a formal apology to the Cathari Confederation for acts of aggression. Those terms are unacceptable. General, Elena interrupted, her voice carrying the steel that had once commanded fleets in battle. Those are not opening positions for negotiation. Those are the consequences of your decision to pursue conquest instead of diplomacy. You have exactly 1 hour to consider them before I turn this matter over to Admiral Chen and her battle groups. She closed the communication channel and turned to face the assembled officers. Gentlemen, I believe our negotiations are about to become much more productive. Ambassador Thekmar's exoskeleton was cycling through colors Elena had never seen before. Ambassador Colonel, I begin to understand why humans have such a reputation for successful mediation. Elena smiled sadly. We prefer to solve problems with words, Ambassador. But we learned long ago that sometimes the most convincing argument is the one you never have to use. General Krextor's response came exactly 58 minutes later. Elena had been watching the chronometer, knowing that the Vorthan commander would use every available second to explore his options before acknowledging the inevitable. Ambassador Vasquez, his voice carried the bitter taste of defeat. The Vorthan High Command has authorized me to accept your terms under protest. We demand immediate cessation of hostile activities against our forces. Elena exchanged glances with Admiral Chen before responding. General, hostile activities will cease the moment your fleet commanders signal their surrender to the nearest Cathari or human vessels. Admiral Chen will coordinate the details of your withdrawal. What followed was a masterclass in military humiliation, delivered with surgical precision. Across 4-star systems, Vorthan commanders found themselves facing impossible choices. Isolated battle groups that had planned to spearhead a glorious invasion were now stranded without supplies or communication. Surrounded by enemy forces that had appeared from nowhere, the surrender transmissions began within hours. Captain after captain of the mighty Vorthan fleet found themselves broadcasting codes of submission to forces they hadn't even known existed. Elena listened to the reports with mixed feelings, satisfaction at preventing a larger war, but sadness at the necessity of crushing so thoroughly an opponent who might have been reasoned with under different circumstances. Admiral Chen coordinated the withdrawals with mechanical efficiency. Vorthan Battle Group 7 has acknowledged surrender terms. They're requesting safe passage to the neutral zone. Granted, Elena replied. What about the supply convoys? Still stranded in deep space. Their escorts have requested humanitarian assistance. Elena nodded. Provide it. We're not trying to create a humanitarian crisis, just end a military one. It was an important distinction. Even in warfare, Elena maintained the principles that had guided her diplomatic career. The goal was always to create conditions for lasting peace, not to humiliate enemies so thoroughly that they would seek revenge at the first opportunity. But General Krextor had one more card to play. Ambassador, his voice cut through the coordination chatter, there is something you should know about the forces under my command. This invasion fleet represents only a fraction of Vorthan military capability. The High Command will not allow this defeat to stand unanswered. Elena frowned. General, are you threatening to escalate this conflict? I am informing you of political realities. The Vorthan Empire does not tolerate such losses of face. Larger fleets will be assembled. Allies will be called upon. This victory of yours may have prevented one war only to guarantee a larger one. Ambassador Thekmar's exoskeleton flashed angry red. Then perhaps the Vorthan Empire needs to learn better lessons about the cost of aggression. But Elena raised a hand for silence. She had been expecting something like this. Military defeat often led to political escalation, especially among species that valued martial honor above practical considerations. General Krextor, she said carefully, what if there were a way for the Vorthan Empire to save face while still accepting the current resolution? Explain. Elena activated the holographic display again, but this time it showed economic data rather than military positions. The disputed systems contain valuable mining resources, but they're not the most valuable resources in this region. Our intelligence indicates there are untapped deposits in the neutral zone that could be worth 10 times the value of anything in the current territories. She highlighted several star systems on the border between Vorthan and unclaimed space. Joint mining ventures, shared development costs, shared profits. The Vorthan Empire could gain access to resources far more valuable than anything they would have taken by conquest. General Krextor was silent for several minutes. When he spoke again, his tone was thoughtful rather than angry. You are suggesting that we could profit more from cooperation than from conquest? I'm suggesting that the galaxy is large enough for everyone to prosper without fighting over scraps, Elena replied. The Cathari have mining expertise. Humans have transportation networks and industrial capacity. The Vorthans have military technology that could be adapted for large-scale excavation projects. Admiral Chen looked impressed.
Elena, where did you get this economic data?
I've been analyzing it since I arrived, Elena replied. The disputed territories were never really about the resources. They were about pride and territorial expansion. But if we can show all parties a path to greater prosperity through cooperation, pride becomes less important. Ambassador Thekmar's exoskeleton shifted to hopeful blue patterns. This could work. Our mining guilds have been looking for new opportunities, and Vorthan excavation technology is legendary. There would need to be safeguards, Elena continued. Shared governance of the joint ventures, equal profit distribution, and most importantly, treaty guarantees that the new territories remain demilitarized. She looked directly at the communication pickup. General Krextor, you could return to your high command not as the leader of a defeated invasion force, but as the architect of the most profitable expansion in Vorthan history. The silence stretched for nearly 10 minutes this time. Elena could imagine the furious consultations taking place aboard the Conquest as Krextor contacted his superiors and explained the new possibilities. Colonel, Reeves leaned over to whisper in Elena's ear. Phoenix Network is reporting unusual activity in Vorthan core systems. Multiple high-level government meetings being called. Elena nodded. The Vorthan High Command was clearly taking the proposal seriously. That was both encouraging and dangerous. If they accepted, it could lead to lasting peace, but if they rejected it, they might decide to escalate even further. Ambassador Vasquez, General Krextor's voice finally returned. The High Command requires detailed projections of the proposed joint ventures. They also demand guarantees of human participation and Cathari cooperation. Elena smiled. They were negotiating now instead of fighting. That was always a good sign. I can provide economic projections within hours. As for guarantees, I'm prepared to stake my personal reputation on this proposal. Your reputation was already impressive, Ambassador, Krextor replied with what might have been grudging respect. Today's events have made it rather legendary. Admiral Chen chuckled softly. Elena, I think you may have just prevented a galactic war by offering everyone a business opportunity. Sometimes, the best way to end a conflict is to show people what they could accomplish if they stopped fighting. Long enough to work together, Elena replied. The Vorthans wanted expansion and resources. The Cathari wanted security and prosperity. Humans wanted stable trade routes and peaceful borders. There's no reason we can't all have what we want. She turned to address both General Krextor and Ambassador Thekmar directly. Gentlemen, I propose we spend the next 48 hours working out the details of this joint venture proposal. If we can reach agreement, I'll personally carry it to the human government for endorsement. Ambassador Thekmar's mandibles clicked in agreement. The Cathari Confederation would be honored to participate in such an arrangement. The Vorthan Empire will consider your proposal carefully, General Krextor replied. But I warn you, Ambassador, if this fails, the consequences will be far worse than anything we have seen today. Elena's expression grew serious. General, if this fails, it won't be because of lack of effort on my part. I've prevented one war today. I intend to prevent the next one as well. As the communication ended, Elena leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. The immediate crisis was over, but the real work was just beginning. Building lasting peace was always harder than winning battles. Elena, Admiral Chen said quietly, I have to ask, did you plan all of this from the beginning? Elena opened her eyes and smiled sadly. Sarah, I planned for the possibility that diplomacy would fail. I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. She looked around the room at the assembled officers and diplomats, but sometimes the most important lesson in conflict resolution is knowing when to stop talking and start demonstrating the costs of continued aggression. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the observation lounge of the human diplomatic vessel Consensus, watching the first joint mining operation begin in the neutral zone. Massive Vortan excavation ships worked alongside Cathari survey vessels while human cargo haulers waited to transport the extracted materials to processing facilities. Across 3 different systems, the sight should have filled her with satisfaction. Instead, she felt an odd mixture of accomplishment and unease that she couldn't quite shake. The profit projections are exceeding our initial estimates by 30%, reported Dr. Sarah Kim, the economic advisor who had arrived from Earth to oversee the implementation of the joint venture. All 3 governments are extremely pleased with the arrangement. Elena nodded absently, her attention focused on something that had been bothering her for days. The intelligence reports from the region showed unusual patterns of activity that didn't match the peaceful cooperation taking place. In the neutral zone, Colonel Reeves materialized beside her with his characteristic silent approach. Elena, we need to talk privately. They moved to a secure briefing room where Reeves activated the privacy shields and pulled up a holographic display showing military movements across the sector. The Vortans are up to something, he said without preamble. Intelligence indicates they're using the joint venture as cover for other activities. Elena studied the display. What kind of activities? That's the problem, we're not sure. But Phoenix Network assets are reporting increased military traffic in systems that should be completely unrelated to the mining operations. Ships moving under civilian transponders, supply convoys with unusual cargo manifests, and communication traffic that doesn't match normal commercial patterns. Elena felt the familiar chill of recognition. They're positioning for something. The question is what? There's more, Reeves continued. The Cathari aren't entirely innocent either. Their survey vessels are equipped with sensor arrays that are far more sophisticated than anything needed for geological surveys. They're mapping every system in the region down to individual asteroid positions. Military reconnaissance disguised as civilian operations, Elena realized. Both sides are still preparing for conflict, just more subtly. The door chimed and Ambassador Thekmar entered at Elena's invitation. His exoskeleton displayed the neutral patterns of formal courtesy, but Elena had learned to read the subtle variations that indicated deeper emotions. Ambassador Vasquez, he said carefully, I have received disturbing reports from our intelligence services. It appears that General Krextor may not have been entirely forthcoming about Vorthan intentions. Elena gestured for him to continue. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected large-scale military construction in the outer Vorthan systems, shipyards working at maximum capacity, construction of new fleet bases and recruitment of personnel far beyond what would be needed for defensive purposes. How large-scale are we talking about? Elena asked. Conservative estimates suggest they're building a fleet 3 times larger than the invasion force we just defeated, Thekmar replied. It appears the joint venture may have been accepted as a way to buy time, while they prepare for a much larger conflict. Elena closed her eyes and tried to suppress the familiar surge of anger that always came when she realized she had been manipulated. How long do they need to complete these preparations? 6 months, possibly less if they accelerate construction schedules. Colonel Reeves pulled up additional intelligence reports. It gets worse. The Vorthans have been reaching out to potential allies. The hegemony of Scar, the consortium of free worlds, even some of the militant factions within the Trade Federation. They're building a coalition. Elena opened her eyes and looked at the evidence displayed around her. The joint venture had indeed prevented one war, but in doing so it had simply delayed a larger one while giving the Vorthans time to prepare more thoroughly. "What about human intelligence?" she asked. "Did Earth know about this possibility?" Reeves nodded grimly. "Admiral Chen received orders yesterday. Human Command is concerned that we may have bought temporary peace at the cost of future security. They're requesting a full assessment of our options." Elena stood and walked to the viewport, watching the mining operations continue their peaceful work below. Hundreds of beings from 3 different species working together toward common goals, unaware that their governments were simultaneously preparing for the largest interstellar war in decades. "Ambassador Thekmar," she said finally, "what are your government's intentions?" "The Cathari Confederation will not allow itself to be destroyed," he replied firmly. "If the Vorthans are preparing for a war of conquest, we will meet them with whatever force necessary." "And human intentions?" Elena asked, looking at Reeves. "Officially, humanity remains committed to peaceful resolution of conflicts," he replied. "Unofficially, Admiral Chen's battle groups have been reinforced and are conducting training exercises in strategic positions throughout the region." Elena felt the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. She had prevented one war through a combination of military demonstration and economic incentive, but the underlying issues remained unresolved. The Vorthans still believed in expansion through conquest, the Cathari still feared for their survival, and humanity was caught in the middle of a conflict that could destabilize the entire sector. "There's something else," Reeves continued. "General Krextor has requested another meeting with you, specifically with you, not with any other diplomatic representative." "When and where?" "Tomorrow aboard a neutral station in the Proxima system. He's coming alone on an unarmed courier ship." Elena considered the implications. "Either he wants to negotiate in good faith, or it's a trap designed to remove me from the equation." "My assessment as well," Reeves agreed. "But there's a third possibility. He might be offering us intelligence about Vorthan war plans in exchange for considerations we haven't discussed yet." Ambassador Thekmar's exoskeleton shifted to concerned orange. "Ambassador, surely you won't consider meeting with him without guarantees of safety?" Elena smiled grimly. "Ambassador, I think it's time General Krextor learned that underestimating human diplomatic methods was his first mistake. Assuming I'm the same person I was 3 weeks ago would be his second." She turned to Colonel Reeves. "Prepare a full tactical assessment of Vorthan fleet capabilities and construction timelines. I want to know exactly what we're facing if this turns into a shooting war. And Admiral Chen's fleet? Position them for rapid response, but keep them out of sensor range. If this meeting goes badly, I want to be able to respond immediately." Elena looked back out at the peaceful mining operations, knowing that they might be some of the last cooperative activities the region would see for a very long time. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, "I'm beginning to think that preventing wars requires more than just diplomatic skill. Sometimes it requires making the cost of war so obviously catastrophic that even the most aggressive species think twice about paying it." Thekmar's mandibles clicked nervously. "What do you have in mind, Ambassador?" Elena's smile was sharp and cold. "I'm going to show General Krextor exactly what happens when humans stop playing defense and start playing to win." She paused at the door, looking back at her companions. "And this time, I'm not going to limit myself to conventional tactics." The neutral station at Proxima was a sterile, functional structure designed for exactly this kind of meeting. Diplomatic encounters that required absolute neutrality. Elena arrived aboard a small courier ship, accompanied only by a minimal security detail that she dismissed the moment she docked. General Krextor was waiting in the central conference room, and Elena was struck by how much he had changed in just 3 weeks. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. His cybernetic implants seemed more prominent, and his amber eyes held a calculating intelligence that hadn't been there before. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said as she entered, "or should I address you by your former military rank?" "Elena will suffice," she replied, settling into the chair across from him. "You requested this meeting, General. I assume you have something important to discuss." Krextor activated a privacy screen around their table, blocking both sound and electronic surveillance. "I want to discuss the future of this sector, Ambassador. The real future, not the pleasant fiction we've been maintaining for the past 3 weeks." Elena leaned back slightly. Go on. The joint venture is profitable and successful exactly as you predicted. But it changes nothing about fundamental Vorthan nature. We are a species that expands or dies. The resources we gain from cooperation will be used to fund expansion elsewhere. And you're telling me this because? Krextor's expression grew grave. Because the expansion my government is planning will make our previous invasion attempt look like a minor border skirmish. They intend to conquer everything from here to the galactic core. Elena felt her blood chill. How many species are we talking about? 47 inhabited systems. Approximately 12 billion sentient beings across 19 different species. Krextor leaned forward. The High Command believes that your intervention proves humans are too dangerous to be left free to interfere with Vorthan expansion. They plan to deal with Earth first before moving against the others. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. She had prevented one war only to trigger a much larger one, and now her own species was the primary target. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Because I've had 3 weeks to study human military records and diplomatic achievements, Krextor replied. Your species has an interesting approach to conflict resolution. You prevent wars by demonstrating that fighting you would be more costly than cooperating with you. He activated a holographic display showing detailed analyses of human military capabilities, economic networks, and alliance structures. My research has convinced me that the High Command is making a fatal error. Humans don't just win wars, you fundamentally change the nature of warfare itself. Elena studied the display. These are classified military assessments. How did you obtain them? I have contacts within the Vorthan intelligence services who share my concerns about the current leadership's judgment, Krextor replied. They believe, as I do, that attacking humanity would result in the complete destruction of the Vorthan Empire. And you want to prevent that destruction? I want to prevent the death of my species, yes. But more than that, I want to find a way for the Vorthans to evolve beyond our current limitations. Elena felt a surge of unexpected hope. What do you propose? Krextor changed the display to show star charts of unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim. There are entire sectors beyond mapped space that contain resources beyond imagination. Worlds waiting to be terraformed, asteroid belts rich in rare minerals, energy sources that could power civilizations for millennia. Expansion without conquest, Elena realized, directed toward empty space rather than occupied territories. Exactly. But such an undertaking would require technologies and expertise that the Vorthans don't possess. We would need partners, allies, species willing to share knowledge and resources for mutual benefit. Elena began to see the larger picture. You're proposing a coalition of expansion rather than conquest. Multiple species working together to explore and develop new territories. With humans providing technological innovation, Cathari providing resource expertise, and Vorthans providing the military protection necessary for operations in unexplored space. Krextor confirmed. It would be profitable for everyone involved and direct Vorthan expansion away from occupied systems. Elena was quiet for several minutes, analyzing the proposal from every angle. It was ambitious, possibly brilliant, and would require convincing dozens of species to cooperate on a scale never before attempted. The High Command would never accept this voluntarily, she said finally. No, Krextor agreed. They would need to be convinced that the alternative is unacceptable. Elena's smile was sharp. Are you asking me to threaten your government, General? I'm asking you to demonstrate the futility of their current course of action, he replied. The Vorthan High Command respects only strength. If you could show them the true cost of fighting humanity, they might be persuaded to consider alternatives. Elena activated her own holographic display, showing intelligence assessments that made Krextor's eyes widen. General, if the Vorthan Empire attacks human space, they won't be fighting just human fleets. They'll be fighting a coalition that includes every species humanity has ever helped, protected, or traded with. The display showed alliance networks spanning hundreds of systems, trade relationships that had become mutual defense pacts, diplomatic agreements that included military cooperation clauses, species that owed their independence to human intervention and would never allow humanity to be destroyed. Furthermore, Elena continued, human military doctrine is based on the principle that the best way to win a war is to make it impossible for your enemy to continue fighting. We don't just defeat fleets, We eliminate the industrial capacity, communication networks, and resource bases that make war possible. She highlighted specific examples from human military history. When we fought the Harvest Fleet, we didn't just destroy their ships. We eliminated their ability to build new ones, communicate with their colonies, or maintain their existing forces. The war ended not with a great battle, but with the complete collapse of their military infrastructure. Krextor stared at the data in obvious shock. The intelligence reports didn't include this level of detail. Because this level of detail is highly classified, Elena replied. But I want you to understand exactly what your high command is considering. They're not planning to fight a conventional war. They're planning to commit species suicide. She changed the display to show economic projections. On the other hand, the coalition expansion you're proposing could make the Vorthon Empire the wealthiest and most powerful civilization in the galaxy within 50 years. Peaceful expansion funded by cooperative resource development across dozens of new systems. Elena leaned forward. General Krextor, I'm prepared to take your proposal to the human government and the Cathari Confederation. But I need guarantees that the current military buildup will be halted immediately. The High Command will never agree to that without significant pressure. Elena's smile was cold and determined. Then let's apply some pressure. She activated her communication system. Admiral Chen, this is Ambassador Vasquez. Execute Operation Revelation. Across the sector, human intelligence assets that had remained hidden for years suddenly revealed themselves. Military bases that had been disguised as civilian installations activated their true functions. Fleets that had been scattered across dozens of systems converged on strategic positions. Communication networks that the Vorthons thought they understood were revealed to be part of a much larger, more sophisticated system. In the space of 6 hours, the apparent balance of power in the region shifted completely. What had seemed like a manageable human presence was revealed to be the tip of a vast military and intelligence network that spanned multiple sectors. General Krextor watched the revelations unfold with growing amazement and horror. How long have you been preparing for this? Since the day I first put on a diplomat's uniform, Elena replied. Human diplomatic philosophy is simple, General. We work for peace, but we prepare for war. Always. She stood and extended her hand to the Vorthon commander. General Krextor, you have a choice to make. You can return to your high command and help them understand that attacking humanity would be a fatal mistake. Or you can watch your species destroy itself in a war it cannot win. Krextor took her hand, his expression showing new respect and perhaps a touch of fear. Ambassador, I begin to understand why the galaxy sees humans as such effective peacekeepers. Elena's smile was gentle, but her eyes remained hard. We keep the peace, General, because we're very, very good at war. The galaxy is safer when we're all working together toward common goals. As they parted ways, Elena felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and sadness that came with successful crisis resolution. Another war had been prevented. Another path to cooperation had been opened. But she knew this wouldn't be the last time she would need to demonstrate that humanity's commitment to peace was backed by an absolute willingness to fight for it. In her private quarters aboard the courier ship, Elena opened her leather journal and wrote, Sometimes the gentlest thing you can do is show someone exactly how much violence you're capable of, so they never have to find out. She closed the journal.